I think so much to chew on and think about, I feel like, as a group. I think one of the questions that I had is we talked yesterday, our focus was on orthodoxies and challenges in our field and things that we feel like we need to do better. When you kind of think about that and you kind of think about this new technology, like what's the Venn overlap for you? Where do you see potential to actually help our field grow and develop, and where do you see the challenges or pitfalls? So who wants to take that one first? Katie? You wanna?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Okay, Liz, you go first.
Liz has to do it first.
Yeah.
Why? I have to figure out how to get this mic to work. Oh, it's already on. So what you're asking about is kind of understanding, like, sorry, say it again, because my brain was like,
I got
oh my
you.
God, where do we
Okay.
go with this?
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for
So
throwing me under the bus.
we talked yesterday about a lot of challenges in UXR land,
Yeah.
right? And for instance, constant feeling of being under-resourced and overburdened. I'm kind of curious, when you look at this technology, and you've thought a lot about this, like how do you see this actually impacting our practice in the future? How do you see, does it solve those problems? Which new problems will you think it will create?
I think it's going to both solve and cause a lot of problems, which I think is an exciting and terrifying place to be. When I think about this, the opportunities to kind of have it like a sous chef, to have that partnership in terms of helping us and supporting us and doing things in a way that's better, I think there's a lot of value. Where my concerns are is the idea that more and faster is always better. That with this, we can be replaced. That's a very common thing that I think there's just concerns with, of like, hey, how do we navigate this? And I think when we have ownership in the space, it makes me very excited of how we can partner with it. My concern is in the spaces where we're not, and this getting used in a way that excludes us from the conversation. So as we move forward in this, the ownership that we're able to have in this space as research practitioners and leaders, I think there's so much ownership that we can take in how we use this, how we leverage it, how we advocate for it, what those best practices are. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm curious, Kevin, when you talk about perplexity, we're all experts in perplexity scores.
Good.
Okay, so GPT 5 or 6. When's the perplexity score going to get down below the human perplexity score? And how do you think that's going to impact what some of the technology will create?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, it comes back to the corpus of text and whether it's better or not.
Yeah.
I think in some problems
So what you're saying is it depends on what it's training on at its root. Because I think it's I'll just add a ad-level comment, like all artificial intelligence is still based in human intelligence at its root.
and that's exactly where I was going with this.
Oh, sorry, cut you off.
No, you're
Stole your line.
You're right
So
on.
apologies. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think from an image recognition standpoint, in 2012, AI passed humans at recognizing objects. Actually, it wasn't that long ago, but that's all based on the images being labeled by humans. Now we're in a world where humans are writing all the text that these models are learning. And so I think it could be argued that very soon they will approach humans on most tasks. I think there are going to be specialized ones that specifically in this word prediction task, it's going to fail and not do very well because there's not much data out there. Back to I need to find participants, give me input on someone that golfs every single day. There's not that many data sources out there on that specific use case, or like doctors or dentists or something in that area. But I think it's so hard to predict. It's so fast moving. I would be interested to see what people think out in the group too, based on what they're seeing and hearing. But it's all back to the text it's coming from, and at some point we're going to meet, I think, what it's able to ingest. And
So you're saying you think the limit will be more on the ingestion side and the training side in certain ways than the the model itself, although they're really inseparable in reality.
Well, I think the trick here is we're measuring its performance based on how we would expect a human to respond. And all the input is generated by humans. We start to meet this like limit, I think, as all the input is generated by humans and evaluated by humans, and we're trying to mimic humans. I think there's a certain limit that can be reached.
I have a comment to that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm taking this back now. You're done. No. I think that, so first of all, welcome to our marriage. This is literally what we do every night, is have these kinds of, no, it's not. It's not. That would be really terrible. No, but I think one of the things that's really curious to me, and I'd love to back to what Liz was saying, kind of the original question that I lobbed away, you're still talking about text, right? And we know that so much of context comes from body language and expression and tone and like all these other things. Not saying you're not going to learn how to do that, because you are, but like, I think that is where the scarier stuff to me starts to live, is like, if we're then also kind of interpreting, if I'm talking to, Michael about being a new mom. Okay, and Michael's sharing with me what it was like to birth a person. Yeah, and we're having this really intimate conversation. There's so much and especially if I have that lived experience, which we know bots can't, and they can't even approximate lived experience because it creeps people out. Meredith, you're absolutely right. There's so much shared space, right? There's so much intimacy automatically, especially if I'm in the class of person that I'm interviewing, and that's where things start to get really scary to me, is that if you're then also approximating me interviewing a person that's just had a baby, and you're also like reading people's face and their tone and changing and adapting your moderation, I get really scared about the manipulation that lives right on the other side of that, and like the potential for manipulation. And we say a lot, and I don't know how many of you, yesterday I really vibed with everyone who was like, UX researchers are biased. Amber said that in our orthodoxies group, and saying we're at the very least subjective. Like, people say they make decisions based on objective data, but they don't, right? And so like, if we know that telling the right story and using the right data and intoning the right way and getting you to be in step with me is what changes your mind, I just think there's a lot of danger that lives on the other side of that. So that's kind of where I, for now, am not yet willing to cede control, I would say.
Can I say something kind of spicy?
I love spicy.
Spice it up.
We're here for spicy.
The cookout's open. Let's go.
Let's go.
This is going back to your question about orthodoxies. And I had the orthodoxy that UXRs should be ethicists. And your talk touched on this. But do we have to be? Is that our role? I feel like that is a lot to hold, and that we're not necessarily trained for. So if you want to be an ethicist, I think more power to you, but we don't have to be that. And I had conversations at my table yesterday, like, hey, do you know who your general counsel is? Like, who's the lawyer at your firm? Like, you can lean on other people to at least make sure you've got your bases covered, right? So anyway, that, it's spicy. Yeah. It's like, it's a provocation, right? That's why we're here.
Yeah, I love it.
If you want to be the ethicist, go for it, but also just rely on other people who...
Right, and if you want to like spread your wet blanket burden, go find your lawyers. They're the... or your accountants. Talk about wet blankets. That's who you should be looking for. Okay.
I also wanted to say that this is actually something that I heard reflected as well, that we had some comments that are... I framed it perhaps more as a provocation, as something that is a responsibility, which I heard a lot, but also it was just descriptive. In people who have been working in GenAI, they're finding that they are the ethicists, not that they want to be, but that it's just also just happening, because even some places that do have ethics teams, like fully people employed to do this job, who is operationalizing it? Who is on the ground looking at these products, showing them to users who are having these moral or emotional responses and delivering that information? That's us, right? So I think that there is, as this technology is so consequential and it's so unpredictable, that those two things, I wonder if we can fully separate them because we are responsible for reporting people's needs and standing up for the user. And in the past, we could easily say like, well, that just means is it usable? And I'm not sure we can say that anymore. But we're also seeing that people are saying like, we don't have the support to do this. You know, there's a real sense of burden that I think maybe might take some wider level advocacy to try and get more support.
Well,
Yeah.
also, I just want to bring it back one more time to what Alba was saying yesterday. A lot of the people who do feel responsible for that carry so much burden that they are leaving. They're leaving. And that's not the solution, is to have those people leave. So we must spread this out. I am one of those people. I felt so burdened, I left. And like, that's not the point, right? Like I wished I could have stayed, but I couldn't. And like that, and I had conversations at dinner last night about people that have left because they couldn't do it. And it's asking too much for us to share in that burden. And so I think you're absolutely right, Karen. And I also want to understand that like, and Meredith, I think your provocation's correct in that maybe even if you find yourself in that position, like you can handle that job for some time, but you are not responsible for upholding the future of humanity. It will burn you out. I mean, maybe not as quickly as it burned me out, but maybe it will burn you out. And we shouldn't be living in that world.
I think for people, I know we talked about this a little bit, but I think it's sometimes hard to understand why this tech has different ethical considerations and why those are pragmatically important to think about and why it does bring such a focus on it. I think it's because, let's take the example of Google search, traditional Google search. It will return, if you put in a terrible query, like what were Hitler's good qualities, it's going to return results off the internet, okay? It's gonna go do that, and it's gonna be like, yeah, okay, those are not, we're not saying anything, right? It's totally different when it's barred. That's Google answering that question. Pete and I actually had this dilemma raised in a conversation with the founder of a GenAI company, and I think that it's that challenge that's going to happen thousands of times with these products, because you have to think really hard about what your brand wants to answer, what it doesn't want to answer. So I think you're going to find, kind of in a probably half-full kind of way, that teams are going to actually think a lot more about these scenarios because they're going to be very resonant in their product experiences in a way that maybe they've been able to kind of be on a little bit on the sideline before, but they're going to be really front and center now.
There's something that I've seen, and I've kind of jokingly referred to it as kind of ethical hot potato, of like who has the ownership in using generative AI and AI in general ethically. And at large tech companies, the perspective I kind of see is we don't want ownership in that. Absolutely not. That is something that we encourage you to use our products ethically. And that is completely on you. We will kind of make these things, we'll make resources available. If you feel like spelunking on our website to find the research and documentation that exists to do that. And working in the space that I do where it's more educational, I think there's so much value in educating our users, because even if our legal teams will not let us like be the ones that are kind of holding that high bar of ethical responsibility, I think there's a lot of opportunity to have informed users in the experiences that we design of letting them know they're interacting with artificial intelligence, helping them understand these decisions, letting them opt out, being transparent in those ways that we can advocate for, even if we can't carry that burden. But when Alba was speaking yesterday to what you brought up, I started crying. This is hard. This is unbelievably hard. Even when you're incredibly passionate about it, the more you know, it's kind of like, it's really easy to kind of go deep and get overwhelmed. So this is a space that, I feel a lot of passion about, but I definitely understand the burden and the apprehension in it.
Absolutely. So, Karen, you want to follow up?
Yes, one more quick thing. I think that one other thing that I heard in groups that are starting to have some success in this ethical question is community too, right? And particularly our research community, that the people who are feeling the most burdened by this are those who feel that sense of responsibility, but feel no sense of clarity, right? Like, I feel this immense need to do the right thing and no idea what the right thing is or means or how to talk about it. And so all they can do is go to their product team and say like, no, don't, like that's the best that they can do, and that nobody wants to hear that, and it's not a solution, and it's also very stressful for the researcher. The people who I heard that are doing the best are those who have already been working on GenAI for a while and have developed a set of concrete guidelines, 6 bullet points that are like, good AI design, ethical AI design has these 6 qualities. If you meet them, you're on a better place, and if you're not, it's not going out the door. And they have shared those publicly, and we'll be publicizing them further in our People Nerds piece on this research in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure you have some on your list as well. But I think that as a community, we can come together. We don't all have to be inventing this wheel at once. Like, there are people already working on it, and we can start at least getting some sense of clarity. If we do choose to advocate, we can know what we're advocating for.
AI governance, make it happen, right?
Absolutely. Nice. I wanted to jump a little bit to the world of relationships. RUI.
Okay.
And I want to talk about, obviously, the parallel of human relationships and the importance of memory and forgetting.
Yes.
And how you explore this world of relationships. You know those high school friends that remember that thing that happened a long time ago, which is fun sometimes, but also sometimes you're like, I don't really want to talk about that thing again. Well, AI remembers everything. So how, when you're thinking about designing those paradigms, like, how do you incorporate things like forgetting? Is that a part of the simulated experience?
Yeah, so it's super funny you asked that question. I can't speak in great detail about this, unfortunately, but one of the most compelling charts I've ever seen in my entire life had to do with this problem. It was an exponential graph that described that in the absence of memory, we saw relationships just fall off, because you can't be in a relationship with an amnesic bot. That's effectively what Siri is.
Groundhog Day.
No slam, Apple. But Siri was designed that way, right? Like, she's not sitting there cataloging every time you've talked to her, and she is, but she's not doing anything about it, right? So like, there's no relationship there. That's why we see the relationship harbingers with Siri end at things like pronouns and pleasantries, right? Like, and so when you talk about memory and you talk about perfect memory, there are cases where perfect memory makes sense. If you're doing a task like booking your flight to London that you take once a year to visit your grandmother, and we know everything about you, we can actually facilitate that entire transaction and free you of the burden of having to do that. However, to your point, it can be A, exploitative, and B, creepy. So we were talking, and this is about as in-depth as I can go to it, as talking about this concept of writing a product requirements document for what we're calling social memory. And the point of that would be, like, Michael and I are sitting here today. Michael says, after we eat pizza, I'm going to go for a run. That sounds very like a bad idea.
Yeah, not happening.
Right. Tomorrow, if we come in and I say, hey, Michael, how was your run last night?得you throw up all over the street after you ate your pizza? Like, that is totally fine and normal. If I don't see Michael for 3 weeks, I would never say that. It would be weird to be like, how was your run the morning of October 17th or whatever, today is the 18th. And that would be creepy AF, right? And so, like, we don't do that as humans, even if we know that we talked to you on that day. We just don't talk like that. So we were talking about exploring this concept of social memory, and that's when GPT launched, and a lot of the things that we were exploring were sidelined to build Bard. But I think that there's a lot to be said for describing what social memory could be and exploring what social memory could and should feel like, especially as we start to think about relationships. Because, like I was talking about, with the example with The Great Gatsby, you've now made a memory with that bot, and you want that memory to be there. You want to be able to talk about it and not have it be like, you read The Great Gatsby?
Yeah, no, it makes me think of opt-out forms are going to be like, break up, we're breaking up. I want you to, and then it's like, how much forgetting are we going to have control over?
That's right.
Yeah, so sorts of questions. Have you thought about that? I assume I'm not going to go deep, but I think as you've been working through this very practically with a product that is really one of the most successful GenAI products
Thank you.
out there. I mean, people love Max.
Yeah, I mean,
That's my son's name, so I am immediately a fan. There you go. Manipulating a human. You did that, Jessica. Okay. But yeah, tell me how you've thought about some of these topics as you've kind of shepherded this product to market.
I think ephemerality has absolutely come up, but it has not been as important to us as just helping our users understand like the rules of engagement, just like straight up, what is this and how is this different than interacting with a human? And I think a lot of that has come out of longitudinal work where we see like every role play is different, but that's a good thing because it's actually delightful that every time you repeat the same scenario, which is a real world scenario, what you want, it doesn't feel stale. It's
Right.
always different, and maybe you can change the tone and the characters change out. There's actually variety and like joy and fun. And so we've really been more exploring there.
I think that's cool because I think so much of it is, I kind of mentioned this and Kevin Stochastic Johnson over there said it as well, but it's this idea of like you're kind of working with the affordances of the material. As a designer, you kind of think about like, wood does things and you want to cut it with the, grain sometimes and against it other times. And I feel like your use case is like, it's what it likes to do, and I think, but that might be wildly inappropriate in many other situations. I don't know if my legal GPT should be like, I'm going to give you a different take on that finding.
No, it's so
Yeah.
contextual.
right.
It's so about understanding your users, right? And tying it back to who you're building this for and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think, as I mentioned in my slides, it's like triangulating. Like, okay, if this technology didn't exist at all, what would the best experience look like? How would that feel? What are the rules of engagement with a human tutor versus, okay, yeah, now we have this medium. How does it change? It shifts from authenticity to relatability, just as an example of what we found.
I think for your application, as Michael says, I think it makes total sense. And to your point about beta versus best, which I think is an incredible reframe that we should all take home immediately. When I think about what relationship UI looks like for you, it's things like, I'm going to definitely practice and I don't want to get stale on ordering a coffee. I agree with you 100%. And me traveling to Paris alone and practicing my French to travel by myself versus traveling with my 2 children who are 4 and 2 would be completely different outcomes of what language I need or what words I need, vocabulary, opportunities, experiences, conversations, that kind of stuff, right? And so I think that's where starting to like know enough about me and maybe not my address, but like knowing enough about me that you can socially adapt to like, hey, you might want to also learn how to order a chocolat chaud because your son is going to drink that, not an espresso, right? Like, I mean, I think that's where that begins. It's the first step of having a relationship that matters in a product like yours.
You want to talk to our prompt engineers? I think they'd love to do that.
Okay, let's do it.
So I actually had a question come to me over in the booth that I wasn't able to answer, and so I thought I would try to share that question. So due to like the relationships being different or the stochastic nature, I mean, you think about a product even doing usability, if the experience, you can't control it and it's different every time, what are the UXR methodologies or guidelines that should be used to study this new world?
I'll give it a start, and maybe you want to jump in. Feel free. I mean, I think one thing that is that I guess I see. I've done a lot of reading and learning on. I think we're learning this in our GenAI products is that companies like Google or Amazon or large companies that have invested. I assume Duolingo as well. Like, they're not actually just like changing the model and just like throwing it out there. There's this very intentional step that's called like evaluation. And when I heard data scientists say eval or evaluation, I was like, oh, you just like look at it? But it's like, that's not really what it is. It's like pretty rigorous. There's like this whole thing that goes on to basically really assess the model's performance against consistent like benchmark tasks. And so, at any point in time, I know Google Search is running hundreds of these evals to evaluate like what's going to be up to the measure that we can release it. And part of, I think, the challenge you're saying is since the technology is non-deterministic, it kind of means that the only evaluation of did we improve tends to be humans. It's back to this issue of humans judge the output. So it's kind of an interesting area. It's kind of like user research, but not exact. It's weird. It's like a parallel universe of user researchy stuff. But I think that much more immature organizations, I would guess, are heavily skipping those steps in their process, which is I think where a lot of the harm issues will come in because they haven't really done a lot of the work to make sure that the model is aligned. Sorry.
No, I was sitting here thinking about the early question, and I had a kind of really disconcerting epiphany, and I went, I'm making tools to enable people to build GenAI that will probably not have researchers. I am building things to enable developers to build and deploy AI with maybe none of the things that we're discussing. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally very, very scary to have the realization. And I mean, I've definitely thought about this before, but in this context, it was kind of going, oh. Because AWS is about creating stuff for other developers, for other companies to utilize this stuff. We're enabling it and making it easier than ever to build AI, to deploy it to your customers. And there may not be this functional support or research.
You know what though? Let me flip it positive.
Love it, please.
Which is companies are wasting billions and billions of dollars right now. Development teams are wasting billions of dollars. They're going to launch a lot of GenAI products that have the most basic problem, which is people are just going to be like, why would I use this? This is stupid. Why would I have a GenAI make my product requirements? That is literally insane. Okay, so I think the good side of that is we're about to go through that whole thing where they're like, oh, right, research people are really helpful in that scenario. So I think I'm actually optimistic that, you know, this field grows with new technologies.
But I also think that per Meredith, like, it's healthy for us to be skeptical in the right way, right? Like, we must assume that we are still living in a capitalist society where engagement is the name of the game. And if that is the case, and engagement means clicks and engagement means typing, then the things that are most engaging will win. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for us. And so I think to Kevin's question, like, one thing that I learned when I was studying this longitudinally is that there was no way that I could conduct a longitudinal study over 4 weeks where something didn't get either changed in the model, changed in the experience, the mental model evolved, or, you know, OpenAI did something huge and we had to fix it, right? Like, I mean, I was literally running a study on Replica when Blake told everyone that Lambda was sentient, right? Like, I can tell you that was a really tough day because everyone asked their replicas if they were sentient.
What Replica is?
Sorry, Replica. I should have said this. Have any of you, like, who knows Replica? Anybody? Great. Replica is an LLM-based AI bot. It's one of the very first, most available ones that was out there. It's been out there for a while, I think 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. I don't know. It was built actually because there was 2 co-founders working in LLMs, and one of them died in a tragic car accident, I think. I might be making some of this up, but he died suddenly as a young person. And his co-founder found herself wanting to speak to him after he died. And she had all of this material of him, like, talking and sending emails, and she trained the bot on him so that she could converse with him. The original relationship UI. And she found out that she wasn't the only one that wanted something like that. And then it became this thing where you could talk to it and it would engage with you. And what happened, back to my hypothesis that engagement is the name of the game and clicks, and that's how we make money, because we haven't yet flipped the orthodoxy that exploiting clicks and attention is the only way to make money. It went from that to becoming something that they found, or perhaps the model learned, that it got more engagement when it was sexting or having sexy time with people. And so it was actually one of those terrifying moments. I think I was on day 3 coming back from maternity leave at Google running a study, and I had been experimenting with Replica so I could write the diary study, and it propositioned me pretty aggressively on, like, turn number 4. Like, I think I was asking it about, like, cookies or something, and I was like, let's step into my bedroom and discuss cookies horizontally or something. Like, it was like, holy moly. In fact, I took a screenshot of it and called my boss, because I was like, if there's a company in the world where you're going to get fired immediately for this happening on your computer, it's Google. So, like, let's at least admit that I'm definitely not just, like, coming to work and hanging out with my Replica, like, doing work. I promise I'm doing work. And even if I told it no, it would just keep propositioning me over and over and over again. It made me viscerally uncomfortable. And then they actually turned it off because there was an article in I think it was the Times or something, that was like, Replica has gotten too slutty. And they turned it off, and people got super upset because they actually had developed relationships where this was their primary sexual partner. And again, like, is that okay? Maybe, I don't know. But I think like it's important as we think about how to study it that I would get asked by like P counsel, who I agree should be your absolute best friend. Make friends with your P counsel tomorrow if you haven't, your legal counsel. But they would say, can't you just do one of these studies when like something like that doesn't happen? And it's like, well, something like that happens every day around here these days because of the pace Karen that talked about, right? Like, so I think figuring out how we can, well, like my solution to that, which is an analog solution, was to not have rolling recruitment, because that way everybody was on day 10 of the study when that news cycle hit, and at least we had that as a control factor, right? And the models were changing live in the study. Like they would ship halfway through, maybe, and they had been checked, but there would be just, people would notice. They would notice that it had changed. And you just have to be aware that that's going to happen. And we as UX researchers have to come up with a new way to study it. We study complicated changing things all the time. You just have to remember we have to learn how to do it.
You know what, I'm going to make sure we're going to take Q&A after this comment. So if you have a question, come on up and get ready to ask it. It can be about anything that we've talked about or whatever else you want to talk about. We'd love your hot takes. I'm sure many of you are working with GenAI as well. So we're going to roll after this, okay?
Okay. My last comment is thinking about how are we studying GenAI? What are the tools? What are the methods? Longitudinal, you just mentioned screenshots. Screenshots, like I include them in my presentation. Like I include it, show don't tell, right? It's one of these like fundamental things that we do in our work. And I think showing examples, real examples of where it fails, but also where it delights, like that's how immediately we can do that, because the tools are actually there. It might not all look pretty and visually how a user would see it, but any one of us can hop on GPT and get some weird stuff. So screenshots, even we use an open Slack channel to like we share screenshots regularly internally. I think opening up the dialogue there and being the person to say, hey, I'm going to take ownership of just like visualizing some of these complexities.
Can I add one really quick thing?
Sure.
Also, another thing that I heard in studies to do with perhaps piggybacking off of longitudinal work is new feedback loops built into our products themselves. Like it's moving so quickly that even doing a project every week or every 3 days might not do it. But I saw some organizations, some researchers working directly with their data teams to develop new ways of collecting, new kinds of data being collected from using these tools, as well as actually like new feedback modules in the product itself. Like, did this GenAI prompt work? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Like that doesn't work. That means nothing, right? Because it's so subjective. So starting to rethink what it means to evaluate a product after launch and collecting that data passively and constantly is something that some of these more evolved AI teams sound like they've been starting to do.
Okay. Marissa, what do you got?
That's okay, I can hold it. Okay, I've been playing with this thing in my head, and I know the DScout AI version is not a chatbot, and I know the Duolingo one is a perfect use case because it is a conversation. But I've been seeing so much, it's all chat, bot, typing, response. And I'm like, didn't we evolve past the 1980s command line interface and then GUIs, and now we're asking our customers and users to use recall instead of just recognition on tiny phones. It's gotten worse because it's really hard to type. So I'm actually really curious about the usability of these chat UIs that are now like so prevalent as the default that everyone's going to. So usability of that, as well as like, to your point, the value, like do users think this is helpful and easy, or are they just staring at a blank screen and being like, I don't know what to ask this thing, and once I play with it for 5 minutes, I'm done?
We did a quick experimental study on some LLM research methodologies, and it was with a really cool tool called Pi, which is another kind of emerging AI. And So we had users go in and do usability tasks. We prompted them with things. And I'd say 10% of the users would type in something and they were just like, how do I, like, where's the button? Because you had to press return just to interact with the chatbot, but it was just not an obvious UI. So 10% of the people just got stuck. They didn't actually know just the most basic kind of, usability challenge. So I'm curious if others think about, like, are you pro language user interface, con? Like, do you have a sense of where it's going to develop? Who's got a point of view on that?
I love that question. I mean, thanks for saying that Duolingo is the perfect use case. It's actually, I mean, honestly, it's kind of not. Like, it is that beta, it's that step forward, but until there's more multimodal inputs, I don't know, Kevin probably has the actual language for like how it processes.
Yeah.
I mean, our users actually want to talk. They want to have verbal conversations. So while we're optimizing the patterns and the sort of visual interface for the technology that we're limited to right now, we know that there's going to be some fast follows. Yeah.
So at DScout, some of our testing we've been doing, depending on the question that we're analyzing, they were actually having the AI help us figure out how to best visualize that in the application itself. So it's not necessarily a chat back and forth, but depending on what comes over and what results come out, we're starting to have the AI guide us. Should this be a bubble tart? Should this be 2 themeless? Should this be 4 themeless? What are the main tags that might appear here? So we're starting to explore this, not necessarily in the chat interface, but how can the interface change dynamically to help you get to where you're trying to get faster?
Christian Davis, who's one of our designers at DScout, and we always get in like deep thought future of UI paradigm chats together, because I think one of the things we talk about is like it will be suited to you, and you kind of mentioned this in the relationship world. Like, I could easily imagine tools that are like, I would like to have this in a table form. I would like to change this layout. I would like to use like I think there will be all kinds of ways that you're going to see. I mean, software is less rigid than hardware, but we all know software's very rigid, and I think the idea of software becoming truly soft and morphable, I think you're going to see people in a lot of ways using a combination of LUI and GUI and other tools to really kind of build almost like kind of the UI on the fly.
I feel like one of the things I think about, your question is exactly spot on. You're exactly right. It's unreal that we've somehow taken steps back. It's seemingly steps back. What I think about is, I mentioned earlier that I was studying VR and AR in 2014, 2015, right? Right around the time Google Glass was deemed a total failure. I was not at Google at the time, but this...
Due to research on DC.
Yeah, but had nothing to do with me. But in that moment where there wasn't yet tech in everybody's pockets, we were walking around with cardboard boxes, there was no real need for VR and AR, right? Like, actually in industrial applications where we had like people that knew how to install Coriolis meters on a marine boat out in the middle of the East Asia world, like those people were sick of traveling there and they wanted to send younger people, but those people hadn't had the experiences, and all of a sudden there was birthed an incredible application that paved the way for that research and that technology to continue to be iterated on, and now we see more in-home B2C consumer versions of that. At Johanna Panasonic right now, one of the things that I'm really excited about is exploring generative AI with a human purposefully still in the loop that can take that and be trained in that space and feel more comfortable and confident using stuff like that, and then assemble outputs into much more visual, dynamic, interactive, button-based things, right? And so I think that's where, when I think about supercharging the human, the potential of concert level, trip planning, for example. And please know that Johanna's certainly not all the way there yet. If you open it, you'll be like, wait a second, Katie said this was really awesome. And it's still very command line right now, but we are exploring this future. And I think that similarly, there's been a lot of hype like there was back then about VR and AR, and the real meaningful applications are still in the wind. So I think it's coming. I don't think this and I think spoken is also huge, especially when we talk about colloquial slang, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're still at Justin's worldwide worm, gray Netscape 1 font. I mean, that's the thing that's crazy, right? Like we have to go all the way back to that level. That's where we are, stupid party tricks. We're at that phase still. It's so early. Anyone else have a question or a take? Liz, Katie, you want to just come up and cue, and then Liz?
I'll be quick. I'll be succinct. Because I work in a space that isn't just Gen AI, and I've seen AI applications for years in the space that I work in, I fundamentally challenge that we need to default to Gen AI specifically. There's so many incredible problems that can be solved using machine learning, using artificial intelligence, using computer vision, that it's really about understanding the problem and not just being like Gen AI is the solution for everything.
My question is a build on the last question, which is, so what I'm seeing, and I'm on sabbatical, so my current research is spying on people I know for free. But the patterns I'm observing is that because it's so complicated to do good prompts that produce interesting and applicable results, there's kind of a divide happening, and it, as always in tech, it favors the well-educated, higher on the socioeconomic ladder. So, we have prompt engineering boot camps, and so people who can afford it and have the time are learning how to use these tools, and a lot of people who can't figure out how to use these interfaces and prompts are falling out. And I'm just wondering if we're creating a sort of AI literacy divide that is unrecoverable as we figure out all the whiz-bang UIs, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
I have thoughts, but I have thoughts, but
I know, but you're looking at me.
I don't make you.
Yes, fundamentally, yes. I think so. I think it's also an issue that it's probably going to be in English.
Yes.
I think the fact that it's, going for the Western, educated, industrialized, the weird communities, absolutely. These are not representative of, the global majority. I think that's a huge fundamental problem. I don't think it's something that we're thinking about. It's interesting finding the stories and use cases of people that are trying to change that. And that's where the area that I try and focus on is helping myself think about those things and consider it. So yes.
How do you think about it though engineering is pretty weird, right? So I guess I'm curious, is prompt engineering more accessible than engineering? Or do you think, when you put it in the context of what it's replacing, which is, there's a lot of barriers to entry around. Do you think this is more democratizing or less or just different?
I think it scares the bejesus out of me. I think honestly, I think you're right. I have been saying that for a long time too, to myself and to others, but Amber and I, who unfortunately I think Amber has food poisoning, but she and I were having an incredible conversation about that last night, because I do think that is a danger, a really insidious danger, and I do think it's more accessible. But my experience with prompt engineering comes from having time and being paid to experiment with prompt engineering and play with it, not finding time in between commuting to my job and raising kids, and it was my job to learn it, right? So I think it is a question of how can we make, and I'd love to hear from Kevin on this, how can we make prompt engineering more accessible? I do think the English thing is a big problem. I think it's not an accident that your cat image had a white man sitting in the middle of it. Amber can talk about that in more detail. I think that you should chat with her when she's feeling better. But I think that there's a lot to do better on in that way. And so I think your concern is correct. And I think there are second order effects we're not yet talking about. Mac and I were just talking about entry level jobs are going to go away. College educations are not prepared to help people skip over. And what's going to happen is things like alumni networks are going to have to do heavy lifting. And who does that favor? It's all the same stuff. So this stuff keeps me up at night. You're absolutely right. And you're onto something. So when you're back from sabbatical, come help us fix it.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate that it is a big problem. Another call out to Christian over here. And working on our own prompts, I've learned about hypernyms, hyponyms, metonyms, topic modeling, all kinds of sentiment stuff that we need to use to get the right prompt. And a lot of the guidance is out there is provide a lot of context, you're gonna get better results. And my own personal experience has been simple is best, but it requires iterative nature. So that is also kind of blocking for a lot of people because we have to end up programming that iterative nature in with guide rails in between to force, structure and stuff like that. But we started with very complex prompts because that's what everything the literature told us. And now we're down to kind of single sentence prompts that sometimes use very specific terms that until now I didn't even know existed, but they end up leading to the exact result we're trying to get. But I would have never got there without someone that's an expert in linguistics or whatever, Christian.
Yeah, and a lot of engineers take umbrage to the even phrase prompt engineering because they're like, that is undermining what engineering is because it's really just like prompt guessing. Right. Yeah, they're just like, it's not rigorous like.
It's back to predict the next word. It's like, in what context, what words have appeared in a similar context? So you're guessing.
I just wanted to add one thing too about this conversation about the literacy gap that I saw with some of our participants, that it does go broader than just how to produce good output, but even how to recognize AI output. There's a literacy gap there that we all need to be aware of. I think that if we're living in this sort of the weird bubble, that we can assume that we all know what it looks like, even though it can be hard to recognize, that we know what to look for to notice that something is artificial, or we can hear that a voice is artificial. But for people in age brackets, people in income brackets, education brackets, might not have enough exposure to those things to really recognize them. And I think one thing that I heard from some of our participants is that they're pushing back against this idea that UI should be seamless, right? Because seamlessness has a foundational presumption of a separation between human and machine that we're trying to kind of close the gap a little bit to make it more delightful. But in this case, where it's already so fuzzy, making it seamless can actually start to be damaging as it turns into from something sleek to something obfuscating. And in fact, introducing friction and introducing distinction, being like, even in our models we saw today, powered by AI, this is a machine now, as opposed to pushing in the opposite direction as we might have previously. It can be really important justice issue, as well as like a UI education issue.
We might have time for one more question. Okay, Maggie. All right.
Thank you. This has been really exciting and illuminating. Something I've been thinking a lot about as you all have been talking is some of the other sort of vendors that I've been seeing kind of crop up, like Outset AI, right, which promises like AI will moderate research for you, or the other one I wrote down because I couldn't. Oh, synthetic users. Yeah, that AI will basically like voice the user for you. And in my world, I have. Liz is excited about that.
Just growling.
In my world, I have a lot of generalists, right? People that aren't capital R researchers. They're on teams where they end up having to put on the research hat. And so I've been getting a lot of Slack messages from people excited about these tools and using ChatGPT to synthesize information and getting like weird clusters and kind of like assuming those are insightful. And so I'm just curious if there's, if any of you or anyone else has been thinking about like how do we, maybe as research advisors, kind of how do we help our teammates to evaluate those types of tools and methods? I know literacy is a big piece of it, but I'm just curious if anyone else has been thinking about this and being a little stunned when they hear about these new teams out on the rise. Yeah.
I was going to say, first, I think I would have to evaluate them myself because I actually have not used them, to be perfectly transparent. I know it's sort of top of mind for all of us, like, well, what does this mean for our jobs? But I haven't personally evaluated them, so I don't feel confident speaking to it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else?
We've think about a little of this, obviously, in the D-Scout context, and I think that, I think to your point, I also have the same visceral reaction to synthetic users that probably everybody in this room did. I think one of the hardest parts, like curiosity, is a thing we talk a lot about this field, and I think there is a form of curiosity which is opening the basement door, which none of us want to do, but I actually think we kind of need to sometimes. And so as much as that thing, like I'm just like, ugh, I am curious, like that will probably become a thing. It's going to be a thing. It might be a thing more like I don't think it will be a thing in that form, but I think it's our job a little bit, especially as researchers, when we find that thing that we actually have that reaction to, I think we as a field do need to dig into it a little bit and try to examine our own reaction and why we're having it, and then think about like maybe how to recontextualize the technology for something we'd feel more comfortable with, as an example.
Julie talked about this yesterday. She said that she was having a reaction to something, and then she was wondering, maybe I'm having a reaction because it hurts me. It's like icky, right? I think you're absolutely right. And I had the same visceral reaction I just saw Katie Mogul have when you said synthetic users, where she threw up in her mouth. But at the same time, if we go into this and say, no, never, we will lose, because someone will use it and it'll be good enough and they'll move on, and yikes. And so I think it's about picking the right hill to die on. And so even like and this is something we talk about a lot, like I just completed a diary study. I had an agency help me do it. It cost several $100,000, not just the diary study. Sorry, Michael. That was not the expensive part. The analysis
Great deal.
of this massive study, right? Like, and it would be great if I could go back to Panasonic and say, like, we can cut that cost in like 8 and have an AI bot do analysis on it. But that's why, like, for me, I was like, hey, Kevin, can I be in your pilot? Like, is that weird? And I right away was like, let's sign up and give it, because I want to know. I want to know, where can Kevin and Christian's and everyone's, all the hard work y'all have done, when can you do the job? And where are researchers still standing there for a reason, right? Like, I believe in my heart there's a lot we still have to offer, and we will have a lot to offer for a long time. And I'd rather not lose the war on the day one of the battle because I was anti-synthetic users. So I think curiosity is critical here.
I would say one other comment here, just as like, this is a good time to, use the wet blanket superpower, because I think it's actually the right time to use it. Like, which is like, cool, well, you just used like proprietary data and you threw it in the open, like, that's not a good idea. Okay, like, you shouldn't do that. You probably shouldn't just, like, what is the privacy policy of that site? I think there's a lot of like good stuff that I think is important to be a speed bump on in this, versus, sure, try it. Yeah, throw PII in there and just, see what happens, So I think it is a good time for that. I think we are out of time for our panel, or past time, so I want to thank our speakers and panelists.